This is really interesting. Like John Gorman was a great resource for the documentary because not only is he a good friend, but he had an enormous library, and so again, you're interviewing someone who has a lot to offer. You can go around their apartment and look at the thousands of titles they have, and it can be a very visually interesting part of your documentary. Some people are just characters and they're good on camera, and those are always good people to interview. And obviously, you want them to be experts in their field. Or if you're interviewing an independent filmmaker and they're on the set, they don't always have to be experts. They can be struggling, and that could be interesting, and people can relate to it, if they're making a movie and it's going badly, So that's my brother Bruce. He had a lot of he owned a video store franchise, got out of it at a very good time, and went into mobile apps, so he's a very smart dude. And he had a tremendous amount of knowledge of the inner workings of how distribution worked and the advantages that Blockbuster Video had over the mom and pop video stores. So when Ken and I started making this doc, we were hoping that we'd get a Lloyd Kaufman interview. I had met him a handful of times, but lo and behold, he was like, yeah, coming out. So, one of the coolest things about Troma and Lloyd is that he's approachable. He'll give out free autographs. And if you go through the right channels, like, reach out to the website, he may be, if he has time, he might be open for an interview, So he's like the East Coast Roger Corman. And so a lot of people would make films for Troma, make their own films, and then have Troma put them out, almost as a rite of passage, to be part of that. So New York City podcast, we started New York City at the end of 2012, and we really tried to make a go of it. Interestingly enough, that New York City podcast was #1 2 years in a row on Podbean in the entertainment section, and so we're really proud of that. And its height was getting 50,000 views a month, and it went on for years and years. Eventually, Ken and Dave both got jobs that pushed them into a different direction. Dave moved outside of the city, and then Ken, he had other obligations. So it was funny. It ended up being me and James for a while, and then it was just me. And I sort of kept it on life support for the longest time. Maybe 6 months ago, I decided the most viewership I get is on Instagram now. So I'm doing Instagram, TikTok videos, YouTube as an archive. Because the truth is, I could, on Instagram, TikTok, I can get 1,000 views on a video. I go on YouTube and I get like 30 views. So I thought it would be funny to do this silly After Effects shot where where the phallic drawing getting shot into outer space. It was a 2001 thing for some reason. I just thought that was hilarious. And this was the Rasputin's video. We happened to be visiting a friend in San Francisco, so we came across this video store. Samurai Cop, we were absolutely fascinated by. One of the funniest things I ever saw was Joe Bob Briggs' commentary on Samurai Cop. Media Blasters put out this DVD, and it was outrageously funny. And I think that's what really sparked Ken and I to try to get Joe Bob Briggs. But anyway, so the podcast was a good way to get interviews with people. So it was really interesting. So the podcast served as not only a place to publish the interviews, but also we could build out the documentary using some of the interviews too. So it was like kind of a 2-for-1 thing, which really worked. It really paid off. When I got to the sequel, VHS Massacre 2, for the doc, it was much less podcasting in that. There's only a few segments in VHS Massacre 2 that focus on podcasting. We did a really long interview with Joe Bob, and he was a super awesome guy. He did this interview before they relaunched The Last Drive-In. So, he's a smart dude. He's always writing books. John Bloom or Joe Bob Briggs always had stuff going on, but I think he was primarily writing at this point. I was working with Debbie Rochon on this documentary. She got in touch with Joe Bob, and basically the documentary was, we had been filming, we were done filming really, and we were editing. It was almost like maybe 6 months to a year after we tried to contact Joe Bob, and he was finally like, hey, is this still available? Can I, you guys still want to do this? And we were like, yeah, absolutely. And so we did it, and He came over Dave's house and we set up the black magic camera, and he was just an amazing dude. It was really important to the doc. And then when he got the show, he got The Last Drive-In, you see, actually VHS Massacre 2, if you haven't seen it, I actually show when The Last Drive-In blew up. He's bigger now than he ever was, so it was very interesting. The reason why I wanted to interview Joe Bob is we just loved his work. He was hilarious. No one knew he was working on this Last Drive-In show. So we just interviewed him because we appreciated his work. And I had met him at Comic-Cons over the years, and it was just someone I always wanted to interview. So it actually worked out. We didn't know at the time when we started this, 2012, that VHS documentaries were going to have this huge impact. And there were a few documentaries that came out. Adjust Your Tracking was out. 6 months into shooting this, Rewind This came out. And so we're like, oh, we're not even close to being done. But we had no idea that movie, they were even working on that. So by the time we put the thing out, we'd done film festivals and then sold it to Trome, and they put it out in 2016. But this had been in progress since 2012. So we put it out, and over the years, it just kept gaining audience. We weren't trying to time anything. We just loved this stuff. That's why we did it. I think that's why these two documentaries worked out, is because we really loved the content, and it was really important to us to get it out. This first documentary was made when the video store era was dying. I didn't know how to deal with it, so I made a documentary about it. That's essentially what happened. And start editing the most interesting stuff together. Really try to whittle everything down, and you take the things that are most interesting, and then maybe you start to explore that. Re-interview people or interview different people and explore those other things. Or research it. Look this stuff up, and what interesting facts have you found about it. Then you start to boil this stuff down and string things along that coincide. For me, it took probably a couple years to edit the first one, because we kept kind of trying to hone in on the things that we were talking about. It was a lot of different subjects we were talking about. The second one was easier because I had gotten overwhelmed with the first one. I knew something was wrong with pop culture in independent film. And I love the B movies and genre movies so much, and the exploitation movies, that I really tried to deep dive into why I love them, and also why they're important. Because you start to say, why are these movies, genre movies, important? And you say, okay, they were doing these, graphic violence or monster movies or kung fu movies, or, there's nudity in them. And why do we like that? Well, I think one of the things is it's uncompromised, at least by taste, not by budget. That was the interesting thing. Tiny budgets, but they would do more extreme things. And that was interesting from a censorship perspective. Just as someone who likes counterculture and independent film to be healthy, a lot of that stuff was kind of pushed out of streaming venues, and that was a little disturbing. It's good to have movies that are kind of out there. It's not good when the counterculture is kind of pushed down to a point where it doesn't exist, They were making more extreme content because that's what it took to stand out, because they didn't have budgets. But a lot of that stuff ends up being really fascinating. And some of that stuff gets carried into the mainstream. So you end up realizing that if you try to censor or omit any of these exploitation films, then let's say it's a pool of mostly bad ideas, but some good ideas, then those ideas don't get brought into the mainstream. And so you really need the pool of fresh ideas, good or bad. And I think it was more about that. The net gain of exploitation cinema is too important to not have happen.